Good morning, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I got a couple of articles I want to share with you guys down in the description for you. Federal Reserve been talking a lot about keeping monetary policy extra accommodative, low interest rates for the foreseeable future until they can get an average inflation rate of 2%. This average inflation rate, they really don't know, or we don't know, or I haven't at least heard a determination on exactly what length of time this average inflation rate is supposed to achieve this 2%. Is it 1 year, 3 years, 10 years? They are talking about the ways they are going to formulate the average inflation, but I haven't heard any definitive timeline as far as what an average inflation rate is going to be. Now, super accommodative, that means low interest rates. That means they're keeping the Fed funds rate at zero or very close to zero, and then they're buying U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. That's the expansion of the balance sheet. It's really the only tool they have. They're not going to mess around with the Fed funds rate because that's already at the effective lower bound of zero. Now it's up to fiscal policy in order to stimulate the economy, and they are going to keep that accommodative by buying up those U.S. Treasuries. At least that's what they are saying. The only problem with doing this is that this ultra-low interest rate has investors out there seeking out higher yield, and that's going into zombie companies, going into zombie loans, and that's creating a problem within the system, or it's going to exacerbate a problem within the system if they decide that they are going to continue on with this super accommodative stance. Now, Federal Reserve President Charles Evans had this to say. I don't know if this was an exact quote of what he said. This is some of the remarks that came from Federal Reserve President Charles Evans, according to Reuters. And like I said, I'll leave links down in the description for all this stuff. The expectations of an extended period of low rates raises concern that investors take on excessive risks as they reach for yield, generating market-wide financial instability. And that's exactly what I was talking about. Those, continuing on the exasperation of feeding the loans to zombies, right? Feeding money to the zombie loans. And he goes on to say here, now this is, let me see, did I get that in the right order? Oh, okay, here we go. So talking about the new policy, the new framework, this is what the Federal Reserve is going to do as far as dealing with this going into the future. It says here, the new framework designed to overcome the downward pull on inflation from persistently low interest rates globally led the U.S. Central Bank to promise super accommodative monetary policy for what could be years as it tries to push inflation upward. Now, I read that and I thought, wait a minute here. That is the most contradictory statement I've ever heard. The new framework designed to overcome the downward pull on inflation from persistently low interest rates globally led to the U.S. Central Bank to promise super accommodative monetary policy for what could be years as it tries to push inflation upward. So the same thing that they are saying caused inflation to go down is the same thing that they are going to use to try and push inflation up. The overcome the downward pull on inflation from persistently low interest rates globally led the U.S. Central Bank to promise super accommodative monetary policy for what could be years as it tries to push inflation upward. I just couldn't believe it when I read that. And I'm thinking, okay, so the very thing that you guys are concerned about this ultra low interest rates driving down, the inflation rate, you are going to go into super accommodative stance, monetary policy, and tried to push inflation upward with even more low interest rates. Man, I couldn't believe it when I read that. Okay. Now, let me see here. This is where he talks about how to deal with that, though, because this is going to create the problem, right? This is the irrational exuberance in which everybody is talking about. And, oops, I spilled my coffee. That's a bummer. I didn't see that go over. This is the irrational exuberance that he was talking about. And and how to deal with it, because if they continue on with this ultra low interest rates, you saw house prices go off the charts, they're going to go incredibly off the charts. You think student loans were expensive before, or however everything is going to get way more expensive if they go into this super accommodative, make ultra low interest rates. Everybody gets to go out there and just take out massive amounts of debts. This is where the problem starts to come in. So perhaps it is time for financial institutions and their supervisors to do the same, that is, review their business models and make their supervisors and regulatory strategies as robust and resilient as possible in this low nominal interest rate environment. Now, I got to thinking about that for a second, that statement, right? How to make it the supervisory and regulatory strategies as robust and resilient as possible in this low nominal interest rate environment. That is going to be very tough, isn't it? Like, how do you keep the irrational exuberance from taking place? You're going to have to sit there and regulate every single little transaction of everybody that's doing everything to make sure that it's, I guess, not feeding into the zombies. So what do? Well, I guess you have to have a rating agency that is qualified to actually rate these things in a qualified manner. See, this is part of like that movie, The Big Short, where they were calling out the rating agencies saying, hey guys, you're rating these things as like, grade A or, outstanding investment grade bonds, when really what they are is junk rated bonds. They're even worse than that. They're toxic. These things are about ready to go belly up, and yet everybody is perceived from these rating agencies that they're good. And the rating agencies told those guys, well, if we don't give them this rating that they're looking for, they'll just go down the street and get it from those guys. So what does that mean? These rating agencies are worthless? Does it really matter? What's the point of even having a rating agency if they're just going to give them whatever they want, or whatever they assume that they want? So that's when I found this article coming out of China, where China has put a halt to that, and they're now calling out their rating agencies. And they made a judgment on one of them that said, you know what? You owe some of that money back to these bondholders for rating it as a higher rating than it really was. They're holding the rating agency accountable. Isn't that something? Now, if you do that and you start holding people accountable for what they're rating these things at, pretty soon you're going to find creditworthiness very difficult. And that you're going to have the finest credit in order to get the loan at the super cheap interest rates. You see where I'm getting at, guys? This is the only way they're going to be able to prevent it from the irrational exuberance from just blowing everything up. They're saying it here. We said it in a video just recently. They're talking about the Great Reset. I think this is probably more having to do with it. They are not going to let this debt go. No way. But they may make it difficult for anybody to go out there and get debt at this super low interest rates, as they try to keep everything super accommodative for only those few who can actually get it. Uneducated Economist. You let me know.